Hey everyone, and welcome to another session of Converge 2024. I'm Will Goad with the RoboHead team, and with me on this next session, we're actually going to be talking with one of our customers, a longtime customer, Ann Bice. She's with Arch Capital Services. Ann, thanks so much for joining us for today's session.
I'm so glad to be here, Will. I love to share information. I love to share things that have been a big win for us, so I'm excited to be able to do that today.
Awesome. As kind of a background, we'll jump into kind of what we're going to talk about here in a moment, which is really joining RoboHead with other tools that are being used within an organization. But before that, could you share maybe a little bit about you and your background and what you do with Arch Capital?
Yeah, sure. I've been with Arch for about 10 years, and we've been using RoboHead about that long. We did some behind-the-scenes work to find out a good project management. And we dove into RoboHead, and we've had it and worked in it many years. And we have 4 groups in Arch Cap or within the Arch framework that are using RoboHead, all different instances. I have always been involved in systems, and sometimes they were written in-house, sometimes so. I've always loved being able to make them do what we need to do to get our work efficient.
Oh, that's awesome. And you said, so you've got, is it 4, you said 4 teams that are currently using RoboHead within Arch Capital, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Awesome.
4 different teams. They all use it differently.
Excellent. And you support branding and communications, is that correct?
Primarily? The mortgage industry group, and then we've got some of our reinsurance groups that are using RoboHead that I helped them get set up in the beginning. That's what I do. I help introduce the setups, how they need to get it going, and then if they want to go off and manage it themselves, they do a great job themselves, and I kind of back out.
Oh,
but
that's awesome.
There's 2 of them I'm still heavily involved.
So you help get them stood up, help them kind of grow up, and then they're off and running, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Awesome. Well, today, as we kind of talk about today's session, again, really what we're looking at is a need that Arch Capital had. Yeah, if I understand correctly, you had kind of 2 tools that were being utilized within Arch Capital. Obviously, RoboHead is one, and there's another tool as well that was tracking some information, and we really were running into some visibility challenges. Can you talk a little bit about kind of
Sure.
that other tool? I think it was Airtable, and what was happening in there.
Sure, yeah. So this group was not fully utilizing RoboHead for all of its features at the time. They had already been using Airtable as a calendar of things that the branding and communications team were using. Emails, posts to the internet, press releases, things that type of team will do, including internal communications and external.
So kind of a publishing calendar almost.
Yeah. So they were using this calendar to keep up with what day things went on, their workload of those things, and what we found out is it was a lot of work was missing within our RoboHead system so that we could accurately tell what everybody had working on and when it was due. So we needed a way to be able to capture that information and get it in RoboHead. So a little bit of research, we figured out that RoboHead and Zapier talk to each other.
Awesome. And then through that, you're able to talk to Airtable, right? So just to
right.
kind of level set before we jump into the weeds of the integration, kind of what I saw, as we were talking and prepping for this, and what you kind of kept coming back to is because not all of the items on this calendar were in RoboHead, you kind of had some challenges. One, you didn't have visibility into the workload of folks because they were working on things that weren't in your project management tool. 2, because of that, you also didn't have visibility into the status. Are these things complete? Are they running on schedule? Are they on hold? What's happening there? And that just led to kind of a, data that's lost, and it affects your reporting, it affects your resource planning and all of that stuff. Is that right? Or?
That's exactly right. Yeah, we were missing a big portion of our projects that people were working on. Folks were saying they couldn't see due dates. They didn't have a full view of all the projects they were working on in RoboHead. And we wanted to be able to let the calendar still live and breathe for its purpose because it had a standalone purpose.
Absolutely.
But we wanted to capture all that in RoboHead so that we could accurately say this resource has this many projects with this many due dates. All that was missing. So we had to find a way to try and make that work where we could keep both running smoothly.
Okay, that makes sense. And you wanted to keep it running smoothly, but I think the other piece that you mentioned when we were talking is this desire to not have things lost, but not be duplicating any efforts, right?
Redundant work, that's right. We didn't want to make folks have to, whatever they had put in the calendar, we didn't in an Airtable, we didn't want them to have to also go into RoboHead and put that same information in there. That would have just been inefficient and not something that we wanted to ask folks to do. So we wanted to find a way to capture that.
Okay, perfect. So then kind of level setting here, so we have these two tools, RoboHead and Airtable. One is used for project management, that's RoboHead. The other is used for calendaring and kind of a publishing calendar almost, if you will. And we need to marry these things so that we have visibility, so folks aren't being asked to duplicate efforts. And I think the other key thing that I really, really appreciated here is sometimes we act like it's an all or nothing. So we'll just do everything in tool X or tool Y. That's not really the case on the ground, right? Like we have to use different tools. There's reasons for it. So to me, I think the Zapier integration piece is really helpful because it allows these tools to keep doing what they're doing and what they're good for, while also still kind of bridging the gap so folks can still kind of see what they need to see in each one.
Right. This team, this is a team at a corporate level that is constantly handling anything from internal communications to external communications. So it is constantly moving, changing. Those dates on those calendars were changed. On the calendar, it was changing. So we really, really focused on how can we capture what's going on that calendar, get it in RoboHead, and make it relevant and make it timely. And the bigger thing was prevent duplicate work. We didn't want anybody doing the same thing in two different places.
Okay, perfect. So then kind of jumping into the integration piece, kind of can you just kind of walk through a little bit around kind of what we're doing here? I know, like, we can talk about what the calendar is in Airtable, but let's talk about how you married it. So what had to come from Airtable and get into RoboHead in order to make this thing work for you?
Right. So we had, as we do with most systems, we had to identify what pieces of data, what fields in that project or on that calendar entry were important. What things did we need to capture to make sure that we could accommodate that and represent that as a project in RoboHead? So we went through all the elements that they were putting in. We tweaked a few, we added a few to make sure that we had the basic information and that it was going to be something that Zapier could take into RoboHead. The technology would work to bring it in there. We also identified that there were some entries in here that didn't need to go into RoboHead. So we had to be able to identify those things and find a way to make sure they didn't go in there. So it was a combination of capturing what we need, don't capture what you don't need, and then keep the two in sync.
Gotcha.
And we were able to figure out a way with RoboHead's help to be able to do that. And that's one of the beauty things I really enjoyed. While Zapier is probably a pretty friendly tool, I just didn't have time to go in and work through all that. So we were really grateful to our RoboHead partners that they could work with us and help make this something we could roll out quickly, a very quick win versus a 6-month or a 3-month win.
Okay, so that's awesome. So then, like, when you talked about partnering with our team, if I understand so on your side, you and your team figured out what needs to come over in terms of what things need to become projects in RoboHead and what things just live on the calendar. And then you had to figure out, okay, if they're coming over as a project, so we kind of filtered out the stuff we don't need. Once it comes over as a project into RoboHead, then you needed to understand, like, what specific data needs to come over, right?
Right. And each one of those calendar entries behind the scenes has 2 or 3 other pieces of data. You can see here, like the date, the published date. We translated that to be the final due date.
Okay.
The RoboHead project number, we added that field so that we could have a match between the calendar entry and the project number that it's going to represent in RoboHead. And there were a few other fields, like your project manager, things like that. So we had to really firm up those pieces that we really wanted and firm up the pieces that we needed to talk to each other, to which would come from RoboHead back into the calendar and vice versa. So once we defined all those pieces, then it was just about building those pieces to work the way we needed them to work, and develop a process on the RoboHead side to make sure we were capturing and validating everything that came over there. And oh, by the way, now we have visibility. Now we have dates that matter. We have resources that know their full workload. So it's such a big win. It really is.
That's awesome. And then just to kind of get into the nuts and bolts of this. So I think the talking back and forth is really critical to keeping it in sync. So if I understand correctly, as we're kind of looking at this, so your publication date becomes your due date in RoboHead. And then the system is looking, and if there's not a RoboHead number existing, that kind of tells Zapier to go ahead and pass this over as a new project. And then once the RoboHead number is assigned, then Zapier is using that to decide, okay, now we need to update something back into Airtable. Is that correct?
More or less. We wanted to be able to make sure that most of these entries needed to go into RoboHead. So we developed a little schematic that says if the person putting the entry in puts in 4 zeros, don't send a project over to RoboHead.
Okay.
If they left it blank, it's such a fast system. It grabs the project number from RoboHead and lets you know what that's going to be and puts it in that calendar entry for us. So then it stays in sync. If you move the date, if you move the entry around on the calendar, it updates the final due date in RoboHead. So people aren't wondering what their final due date is anymore just because it got moved on a calendar. It's actually talking to RoboHead and telling it, we've moved this due date forward or backwards.
Okay, and that's another big piece, obviously, because if you just create the project in RoboHead and now it's off on its own and something changes,
right,
that would create a big thing. So we needed to make sure that it was both pushing and pulling data based on whatever the criteria are. So we're updating a project or we're creating a new one. So, okay. As far as you mentioned, like how we helped you, can you talk a little bit about what that engagement was like?
Sure. It was so easy, honestly. I reached out to them and told them we were interested in using this tool that we had seen out there called Zapier that said it worked with RoboHead. So I engaged the team. It was just wonderful. It didn't take forever. It only took a month or two, maybe. I can't exactly remember, but it seemed very, very quick. And they helped walk me through understanding what we could and couldn't do. We tested it, we rolled it out, and that engagement was just great. Those guys are really good. They know what they're doing, and it saved us a lot of time and pain.
That's awesome. I think that's, at least for me, again, I'm biased, but I think one of our support team is one of our biggest strengths, their willingness to jump in and help carry water for folks that don't have the time, and also give some insight into how to execute things like these integrations. So, thank you, Ann, and I hope everyone else has a great rest of your afternoon, and will stick with us for the next session.